So I had an investor, a subject to investor contacted me on one of my deals, and he wanted to buy the property subject to. So I asked him, is it a subject to deal that you're about to offer me? He said, no, no, no. I'm not offering you a subject to deal. It's a wrap. It's seller financing. It's a wrap. So I said, okay, explain to me how your wrap works. Okay, well, tell me again how your contract works. You say it's not a contract for deed and it's not a subject to. Explain to me how that works again.
Okay, so you have the underlying note, right? The underlying note stays in place, okay, at closing. A new promissory note gets created. But we set up at closing, the default terms on this new note are much more aggressive and favorable to the seller, which means, like, let's say if you have a payment due on May 1st, and if you don't make any payment within the lender's grace period of 15 days, we would be in default on the note.
Well, you correctly said that that the mortgage is about the same as the value, right? Because they got a mortgage, right? So then, in that case, what would you do, where there's no equity?
That's where we come in. We need to know the exact numbers. We need to know, like, is this property
What I have, it's a promissory note that would go on top of the mortgage that's there now, right? And then the interest rate and the terms and the payoff date and everything will be mirrored. And so then then you can have, the paperwork to say that if you want to foreclose upon us, we can, because it's an aggressive promissory note. It gives you all the power, and our trust owns it, and our trust is the one that signs that promissory note. And he's explaining all of this. So then I said, so what happens to the note underneath it? Is it a contract for deed then, where the seller retains the note? He says, oh no, we take title to the property. And I said, so you take the deed, right? So he says, yeah, but it's a wrap. I said, no, it's a subject to deal. Oh boy. Anyway, these investors, they need to get trained. Anyway, this is Alicia, and in today's video, I'm going to talk to you about wraps and subject to. And some people say wraps are better. I say subject to is better, but I understand both sides. So I'm going to try to explain to you both sides, and then maybe you can decide what's up. Okay, so the argument is this: we want to use wraps and we don't want to call them subject to, because it's more palatable with everyone, right? With the attorneys, with the agents, because you got to please them, because they're the ones with the properties that we're trying to get into. So we're going to try to please everybody. So we're going to introduce them to our deal by way of saying it's just a owner financing, and we're not going to use the word subject to. I say you should just be straight up in the first place. It's a subject to. All right. So here is the argument for it, right? Subject to doesn't make reference to any proof of income, right? When we take the property subject to, we are basically just taking the deed. So the seller deeds you the property. We put the property title into a trust, and then we own the trust, and there's a trustee that's assigned to the trust, and the deed is filed. Yeah, that's it. If the seller's gone, I take the deed and we move on. We pay the mortgage and we make up the back payments. If there's anything to be done to the property, it gets rented out, and we go on to the next one. That's basically how the subject to deal works, right? But they're saying that no, it doesn't give reference to any proof of income to the seller. And the reason why we want this is so that when they apply for a mortgage, let's say in the future, that those payments that's on that promissory note, so it's going to become like a payment income to them, which is going to offset that underlying debt that they're still on. So if they can't show any payment income, it would make it difficult for them to qualify for that mortgage. but I beg to differ. I don't think so. I mean, you're leaving out some really important things here, because with a regular subject to deal, you don't need to obligate yourself in a wrap situation in order to make a subject to deal. Actually, you can give them a separate payment arrangement that is separate from the subject to documents so that they can use in case they have to. There's the answer right there. So they can have a separate document, which is actually more acceptable if you, let's say, had a rental agreement. That would be very acceptable by a lender, by the way, to do this kind of a deal. Very acceptable. And then the other thing that us investors use over at mycashflowuniversity.com, we actually use servicers. And they are much like the servicing companies that would service your loan. So you have a mortgage on your house and you get statements coming in the mail, or you get them, and you call and you ask for payment arrangements or whatever. That's the servicer. We have the same thing. We can hire a company quite just like that would service our note. I mean, it's there for us so that when they can collect the payments from our tenant buyers, and then the payments come to them, they send out statements every month and give them late payments and late fees if they pay late and all that. The payments would come into them, and then they would just make the payments to the underlying loan to the underlying lender, and then send the balance to us. So that's what the servicer does. With this servicing company, though, as long as the payments are going in every month after month for even up to, like, say, 12 months, that's awesome payment history. So then any loan officer would look at that and say, yeah, that's good. I mean, that would actually not damage their credit at all. As a matter of fact, it would make it better. And as long as you have that second agreement that for payments, then that should offset the DTI, no problem. So you don't need to reference any proof of income, really. Proof of income could be made in a separate agreement. All right, so that kills that. The other argument is that the seller has no way of taking back the property if you don't pay. Okay, let me just say this. If you take over a property subject to and you're unable and you don't feel that you can make the payments on that property, then have the sense to give back the property to that owner. No, I'm serious. Let them deal with it after that. I mean, and if you have a tenant already in there, then you should be able to make the payments. If you do it the way it's supposed to be done, then you shouldn't have that problem. So then you shouldn't want any kind of recourse action to be so readily attainable by the seller to actually foreclose on you in any way. The truth is, if you're doing a straight subject to, the seller would just hire an attorney and just get the deed back into their name anyway. But if it only becomes easier if you give them an aggressive promissory note promising to pay or else they can take the property back. Why would I want to obligate myself to such a thing when I don't have to? So then it don't make any sense. I think with the promissory note in place, though, let me just say there's plenty of ways to protect the seller. And you don't need subject to a purchase wrap to protect them. Like in the cases where you should do it and you shouldn't do it, in the majority of my deals, let me just say it this way, because again, I can't give you legal advice, right? Only your attorney can. In the majority of my deals, they're done in a straight subject to deal. That's it. And a separate payment agreement is in place so that if they need it to go to their bank, they can do that in order to get, let's say, another loan. I try to stay away from too many complicated paperwork where you're adding another thing in there. Majority of my situations, I never used a wrap with it. However, if, for example, you had a seller who said, I would like to be more involved in this transaction, and I want there to be something in place where I can just press the button and then get the property back. For example, if I give you notice to cure the default that you haven't made the payment to my lender in X amount of days, then I give you a notice and you don't pay within, let's say, 15 days or 30 days, and we're going to go to a month late, then I can just take the property back. So that is very aggressive, by the way. In a normal circumstances where you have a mortgage and you are a month late, the lender doesn't take the property into foreclosure, if they're only a month late. They give you time to cure the default. So that would be very aggressive. If, for example, you're 1 month late and then somebody decides to press the button and then have you ejected. That just seems so harsh, So I wouldn't want that. And I wouldn't give anyone the power to do that to me. So you decide. Also, so if the seller says, well, I just want to be more involved, then perhaps that would be a good option. But if somebody is very concerned and they wanted to be more involved in the transaction, then don't do the deed transfer then make it a contract for deed, especially if they have equity in the property. The way that's done is that you would do a contract for deed. And what that means is that the promissory note is made, and so it wraps the note that's underlying that mortgage, but the seller doesn't give the deed. And you just pay on that as if you own the house. You can lease it out with the option to buy to someone else just the same. It's just that the seller has the deed still until you make good on the contract. Like maybe you cash him out and then he'll give up the deed, right? So that's how the wrap should work, not with you taking the deed as well. Then it's a subject to deal with a wrap and a cherry on top. The other argument says, well, so let me just explain to you what a wrap is, right? So the wrap is really that you're giving the seller a promissory note, much like that what you have with your own mortgage company. So the note is then recorded showing an income to the seller. And if the seller should try to purchase another property while still being obligated, to that property via the note, that he sold, the seller will then be able to offset that debt with the recorded promissory note that he has from you. So this will in effect wash out the mortgage that is still in their name, and the debt to income ratio would be lowered. I don't know if it will be lowered now, but then that's the effect. And with a wrap, the seller has the recourse against you if you don't pay the mortgage. So since you obligated yourself through giving a promissory note, the land trust is what creates that promissory note, by the way, and then the seller can foreclose on your trust and not you. Actually, I got news flash. Hello, when somebody's foreclosing against a note that you signed to them, they're not going to foreclose on just a person or just a land trust. So the truth is, they would actually sue the land trust and the trustee and you. Yeah. So that means your LLC would be in the lawsuit. I'm not sure that you want to see your name as a defendant in the defendant spot on a lawsuit. I don't think so, right? So why give them the possibility of that being so just because you missed a payment on your mortgage? Oh my God. So here is the thing. You either take the deal subject to, and then you create a separate agreement for the seller in case they need that for something else, and that's it. Do not obligate yourself, and I don't believe you have to obligate yourself anymore. But I suppose if you wanted to make this deal more palatable to some people, maybe to some agents that you're trying to buy the property and you're telling them, hey, it's not a subject to, it's a wrap. and I'm going to pay your commission and all this and all that. Maybe they'll listen to you. But I'm going to tell you that a wrap where you take the deed is a subject to. So no matter how you slice it, it's still a subject to. Having said all that, the most important, or let me just back it up a little bit. The best way to use the subject to, right, that I've seen in my experience is when you get out of them quicker. So is where you cut a deal with the seller, where you're not just taking it and then leaving them in the dark somewhere and thinking they wouldn't understand. I'm the investor, so therefore I'm going to do what I do. No, it's better when you involve them in the situation, and you involve them and you say, okay, Mr. Seller, this is how I'm going to buy from you. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the deed for what you owe on the property. And then I'm going to actually get out of the deal within X amount of time. So then they can be involved in that agreement. So they're not wondering after 2 years, am I still on the deed? No, they shouldn't be wondering, because you should have already told them what's going to happen. I'm going to lease it for 3-year terms. You'll say the same thing with the subject to. I'll be on the deed for, let's say, 3 years or 2 years, 6 months. And then it's going to depend on how you exit. An example of what I used to do is I would cut a deal with them and I would tell them, hey, I will be on the property for 6 months. I'm going to, because these were junkers that I was taking over. So I would be on this underlying mortgage, right? You're going to give me the property subject to, and you'll be on the mortgage for 6 months. Why? Because here's what I got to do. It's a junker, dude. You know this, right? So I'm going to fix it. Rather than me getting a loan, and it's going to cost too much money for me to do that. So I'm going to take this property subject to, and you're going to be a part of this whole thing. So I'm going to give you a promissory note for your equity. So how much is your equity? Oh, I think I need $20,000 out of this. So if they are looking for $20,000, and maybe I think, okay, I can probably get more than $20,000 out of this deal, because I'm not doing this for free, obviously, right? So if I have to give him 20, I better darn well be able to get the same or more. So then I will take the deed subject to, maybe he owes taxes too. Maybe he couldn't even sell it on the open market because of all the liens and stuff that was on the property. So I took it over and I gave him a promissory note for his equity, and he's sitting there going, thank God. So then I use my line of credit and I do the repairs. All the repairs that are needed. I corrected the code violations that were on the property, and now the property is all cleaned up and can be sold on the open market. So then I will flip it and say I did that within 6 months. Maybe it took me longer. Maybe it's a year. But, we're in agreement, so he understands what's going on. So I flip the property. Either I'm going to flip it or refinance, right? Because if for some reason I'm not able to flip it because the market went down or whatever, I'll just refinance it and give him his money. And then I'll keep it and do something else with the property. And that's the kind of options that we have and that we can use. But in the case where I can flip it, then everybody gets paid. He gets paid his $20,000. I pay off that underlying mortgage, and I made some money for myself. And everybody's happy. That's a great subject to deal. And that's how I used to do them, the short-term way. Now, then I got slick and started doing them the long-term way, where now I'm saying, I don't want stuff that I got to fix. Too much work, and then, I already sold the property and everything. And then there's like, I got nothing. It's sold. It's gone, I don't have a property there that's accruing value. So yeah, I got nothing. I want a property that I can keep. So then what I'm doing now is I find properties that are newer. So in what us investors are doing right now, we're taking properties that have been financed maybe 2-3 years ago, and they've got the lower interest rates. And so we go after them. And so they're new. We're trying to get the ones that were new, that the people bought them new, and they got them at a lower interest rate. So they haven't had a chance to pay down too much of the interest, but the interest rate is what we're looking at. So we could take those properties subject to and then keep them long term. Long term could be 2 years, it could be 3 years, but that seller has to be included in that decision. So what is more important though is the strength of your exit strategy, not how you get into it, because it's going to be a subject to deal. So it's more important with your exit strategy. You should focus on getting the right tenant buyer in there and service them properly. So you're going to have a plan, right? You're going to decide whether you're going to sell the property or you're going to keep the property. So if you're going to flip it, then you're going to flip it slowly. And then you're going to have some ancillary services like credit repair that your tenant buyers could use so that they can better their credit so that they can buy from you. And then that way you have a predictable time as to when they will buy. But if you decide that you want to keep the property, maybe after a while you keep some of your properties and keep them long term, then have a plan to cash out when that time comes. Maybe you'll use an investor type of loan, maybe a DSCR loan or something along those lines to cash out of that property and to refinance it so that now the property and the loan would be in your name or in your LLC's name. All right, so I hope it helped you. And consider subscribing. Join us over at mycashflowuniversity.com where we can do deals together and chat.